Chapter 17, Working in the Dark. Cheyenne swam out of a dream where she had been lost and running into things. Are you hungry? Griffin asked from the doorway. It took her a minute to orient herself. She was in a room in an old house in the middle of nowhere. Only 4 people knew where she was, and they were the ones who were holding her captive. Are you hungry? Griffin asked again. She wasn't hungry. She wasn't anything. She was empty. After her escape attempt had failed, Cheyenne had pinned her hopes on the idea that Griffin's dad was setting up a trade. She had told herself that she might even be home tonight. She had tried not to think about the details too much, intentionally keeping them fuzzy. The only concession she had made to reality was to admit that maybe it might not happen until after midnight. When Cheyenne still didn't answer, Griffin continued on as if she had. I've got to get some food into my dad to balance out what he's had to drink. There's some frozen pizza I can heat up. How about that and some orange juice? Griffin was forced to shout over the music that thumped in the living room, some kind of heavy metal that made her head hurt. Cheyenne nodded. She pulled the quilt back over her and closed her eyes. She didn't need to do that for it to be dark, of course, but it was a way of signaling that she didn't want to talk anymore. She half dozed until Griffin sat down on the edge of the bed and lifted the quilt away from her. I thought I would eat in here with you. As she pushed herself into a sitting position, Cheyenne could smell herself the rank sense of fear and fever. It was strange how quickly things could become normal, she thought as she took the plate from Griffin's hand. She didn't like to be dirty or cold. She didn't like people telling her what to do, but here she was, feeling almost like it was an expected part of her routine. The same with the cord knotted around her ankle. She didn't really notice it anymore. At least someone had turned down the music to a more tolerable level. There's a glass about 6 inches to the left of your elbow, Griffin said. At 10 o'clock. She picked up one of the 2 slices on her plate and took a bite. Pepperoni, tasting mostly of salt and fat, with a big pillowy crust. Danielle was really into healthy eating. She would be horrified by this pizza. Cheyenne took another bite. Maybe she would be home by tomorrow. Maybe in 24 hours she would be just getting out of the shower and sliding between fresh sheets. Griffin spoke around a mouthful of food. What's it like being blind? Do you think about what it's like to have hair every second? Cheyenne blew air out of her nose. It's just who I am now. I try not to think about it all the time. Which was true, but it didn't work. She never really forgot that she was blind. And even if she did for a minute, she could count on there being a reminder, usually painful. She sighed. At first, it feels like someone has thrown a blanket over your head. Some days you just want to scream, I'm inside here. Doesn't anybody out there see that? Doesn't anybody remember me? I'm still the same person. Cheyenne fell silent. She knew the last sentence wasn't true, even if she wanted it to be. She wasn't the same person. Being blind gave me a whole new life. I didn't ask for it. She licked the grease from her fingers. That's why I'd rather talk to someone on the phone or computer, because then we're the same. We're equals. What do you mean, equals? Cheyenne tried to put into words what she had never said out loud. Think about how much of talking has to do with what you see and not what you hear. When you meet new people, you can tell a lot about them, even before they've opened their mouth, just by their clothes, how they stand, the expression on their face. But I don't see any of that stuff anymore. Plus, in real life, I'm always talking to people who have already walked away, or I answer people who aren't really talking to me. But when I talk to someone on the computer or the phone, we're at the same level. We know exactly the same amount of information. While she spoke, Cheyenne slipped her hand into her coat pocket and felt the piece of glass nestled in the kibble. It reassured her a bit. The glass was like a secret weapon. She ran her finger lightly along one edge, even as she spoke without a pause. She knew Griffin had no idea what she was doing. Sighted people always had to look, even at things their fingers were already telling them about. They couldn't find what was in their pockets without looking down, couldn't hunt through a purse without sticking their head inside. She knew because she had once been one of them. But blind people knew how to do things without giving themselves away. Their hands could work in the dark like moles, blindly tunneling, but always getting where they needed to go. Blind people could look like they were paying attention to you when they were really paying attention to something else. What happened anyway? Your dad said you were in an accident. The silence stretched out before Cheyenne finally found herself answering him. It was the summer I was 13. My mom grew up in Medford, and we were down there visiting my grandmother, just the two of us. My dad was on a business trip. Because of Nike, he travels a lot. She took a deep breath. We had gone for a long walk, and the sun had just set. It was me, my mom, and my dog, Spencer. We were facing traffic, walking down this long, straight road without any sidewalks, just gravel on the side of the road. Each car that came up behind us would throw our shadows way ahead of us, so they were as long as the block and really thin. As she spoke, she saw it with her mind's eye. Then, as each car got closer, our shadows got closer and closer and shorter and shorter. I told my mom it looked like our shadows were walking backward. That was the last thing I ever said to her. She remembered how her mom had smiled in the half light, her curls wild as they often were by the end of the day. Her mom had been beautiful. At least that's how Cheyenne remembered it. Her mom didn't spend nearly as much time at the hairstylist or the gym as Danielle did, but she did have plenty of time for Cheyenne. They had laughed at the same jokes her dad never thought were all that funny. Every Saturday, her mom had taken her to the library, and they had each come home with a big sack of books. When anybody asked Cheyenne what happened to her, she always just said, car accident, in a tone that made it clear she didn't want to say one more word about it. She never talked about it. Never. Now, she took a shuddery breath. 1 minute, we were walking, watching our shadows come back to us. The next minute, 2 cars were coming up behind us. It was 2 kids racing, so one was in the wrong lane, the lane closest to us. Then that guy saw the headlights of a car coming toward him and panicked. He swerved and hit us. She didn't say that her mom's body had ended up almost a block from where they were first hit. The car ran right over Spencer. That was my dog. It didn't hit me full on or I'd be dead too. Instead, it threw me into a speed limit sign. The top of my head smacked into the pole. Cheyenne realized she was unconsciously pushing her fingers through her bangs, which she always carefully fluffed so that the scar wouldn't show. Her index finger traced the twist of its raised edges, and my brain got bounced off of the back of my skull. And when that happened, it killed the part of that tells me what I'm seeing. So my eyes still work. My brain just can't understand the message. There was a long silence. Then Griffin asked softly, "Were you knocked unconscious?" Only for a few seconds. When I woke up, I couldn't see anything. I could feel the blood running down my face, and I told myself that was why I couldn't see. I knew my arm was broken, but everything else seemed to be okay. I was screaming for my mom, feeling around with my good arm. All I could find was one of her shoes. I guess she was literally knocked out of them. Cheyenne fell silent, her head crowded with memories.